Interior. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome with me the 53rd Secretary of the U.S. Department of the Interior, David Bernhardt. Secretary.
Well, good morning. Can you all hear me okay? I think the answer to that's sort of yes, right? I always worry about it. I'm a little deaf, or at least I tell my wife that, and so I'm never quite sure. Well, look, thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. It is great to join you all at NACo to highlight some of the work that we're doing at the department with state and local communities. But before I begin, let me tell you a couple things. It is a privilege to serve President Trump as the Secretary of the Interior to advance his priorities for the department and for the American people. He is getting the job done, and he exhibits a great degree of leadership. It is also without, that's right. It goes without saying that the President is committed to making our government work better for and be more responsive to the American people. You know, I think he will be the first president to address NACo since 1996 tomorrow. That's pretty significant. And he will be here because of his commitment of making our federal government work better to serve both the state and local communities. The President has placed a premium on reaching out to state and local elected leaders. I know this because I regularly visit with governors from both parties who say to me, I talked to the President about X or Y, and that's not a joke. As Secretary, I can say that the President is tremendous to work for because he's extremely straightforward. He gives you a target and he expects you to hit it. He is willing to make decisions. He is also willing to lean in and stay the course for the right thing when things become heated, which is really important to someone tasked with leading a department. Under the President's leadership, more Americans are working, earning more, and keeping more of their hard-earned income in their pockets. Some 225,000 jobs were added in January, surging past predictions and bringing more good news to American workers. Let me give you a couple facts. At least 100,000 jobs have been created in 34 of the 38 months since President Trump's election, and the unemployment rate has achieved record lows. It now stands at about 3.6%. It's lower, frankly, in many of your states, but overall it's near its lowest level in half a century. The unemployment rates for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans all hit record lows in 2019. And unemployment rates for those with a high school degree, without a high school degree, and people with disabilities are also at record lows. The bottom line is we are all benefiting from the President's policies. Now, the Department of the Interior has a vast asset portfolio, from stewarding our public lands, national parks, and landmarks, to conserving Americans' natural resources and supplying energy and hydropower throughout the West. Interior manages an infrastructure asset portfolio that's valued at a little above $300 billion, ranging from large dams and canals in the West to iconic national landmarks. In total, we're responsible for roughly 43,000 buildings, 100,000 miles of roads, and 80,000 structures that all sit within the 1 out of every 5 acres of land that we manage on shore. We also manage 1.4 billion acres of the Outer Continental Shelf. The President's leadership has us striving to be a good neighbor and to better serve the American people across the board, whether that is through our incredible national parks, our incredible wildlife refuges, or on land that we manage for multiple uses. As you might expect, we also generate a significant amount of economic activity and revenue from the activities that take place on those federal lands. In 2018, activities on interior lands resulted in supporting about 1.8 million jobs. By delivering on the President's priority for safe, secure, and reliable energy, we have nearly doubled disbursements to states, Indian tribes, and conservation initiatives from federal energy development since 2016. Last year, our revenues were over $12 billion, roughly half of which goes to states. These disbursements assist states and local communities, as does PILT, which Judge Moore mentioned. I grew up in a small rural community in western Colorado that was completely surrounded by federal lands. And one of the things that I left home with was the knowledge of how consequential decisions Interior makes can be to communities, some of which you represent. Our decisions at times can have a great impact on your economic hopes and dreams. And knowing that, I strive to ensure that we carefully evaluate your views on each decision that crosses my desk. We may not always reach the same conclusion, but I will never make a decision that does not fully try to appreciate your position and consider how your position might be accommodated consistent with our obligations under the law. Let me give you an example of how this works in practice. Last fall, a Democratic member of Congress requested a meeting with me. He told me that he would be bringing several elected representatives from communities in his congressional district to the meeting. Those communities were facing the potential expenditure of millions of dollars in beach replenishment efforts because lawyers in the solicitor's office in the 90s had made a determination that the sand that accumulated in particular inlets from prior beach fill could not be used for replenishment for future storms. When I prepared for the meeting, it seemed pretty clear to me that the department's legal advice was not that strong. But since the matter had been disputed for years, since the 90s, it seemed that I must be missing something. My thought was that the local jurisdictions must be seeking something more than what the law provided for. So when they arrived, I queried them, and it turned out they wanted nothing more than what the law gave them. Yet for a long time, the Bureau had not even been willing to seriously consider their issues. We looked at it, and I brought it back. I brought the Fish and Wildlife Service's view back into conformance with the law. These communities were happy, and I think the law is now being faithfully followed. Now, I do not raise this example to say folks will always be happy. As a matter of fact, at about the same time, a Republican governor came to see me about an issue that he really wanted sped up. To prepare for the meeting, I sat down and read a lengthy environmental impact statement. And when I finished reading it, I met with him. And in my review of the document, I had concluded that our agencies had done a subpar job. That meant that more time was needed for them to complete their task. The governor and I discussed this. He listened as I walked through the situation. He left knowing that the decision was not what he wanted, but it was a decision reached after time was put in, upon reflection, and he knew that my position was more than reasonable. That is the standard that I hold myself to, and that is the standard that I expect every single employee within the Department of the Interior to follow who is interacting with state, county, or municipal governments. The department is committed to be cooperative and believe in the principle of federalism, to working closely with you. to advance cooperative conservation. It might not be a barn burner, but it's absolutely true. Now, let me talk to you about a few of the things we're doing. First off, we've spent a good amount of time over the last couple of years strengthening on-the-ground conservation efforts for species recovery, and we've gone a long ways in terms of improving the implementation of the Endangered Species Act. And some of the regulations that we changed had not been modified or updated since the mid-1980s. We are focused on making Interior's law enforcement, both within and outside of Indian country, more responsive to local communities. And we are respectful of the state's role in wildlife management. At the same time, we have opened or expanded fishing and hunting opportunities on federal lands within the Fish and Wildlife Service on over 1.7 million acres. We've simplified our regulations for hunting and fishing to try and bring them in conformance with your state regulations to more closely match your state objectives. And perhaps most importantly, we are implementing innovative and collaborative approaches to wildfire reduction. And this has been generated by the President's interest in this issue. In December of 2018, the President directed that the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Interior promote active management of America's forests and reduce rangeland wildfire risk with specific targets. It was a big thing. Generally, when you read a presidential memo, what you'll find is it has a goal, but absolutely no targets. The President found that unacceptable, so he gave us specific measures to hit, as most managers would. The reality is we tripled, in many instances at Interior, we either tripled or doubled his respective goals. For example, we have reduced fuel loads on more than 1.4 million acres of DOI-administered lands, covering nearly 2 times more acres than the President asked us to do. We're focused on protecting water quality on more than 1.4 million acres that the Department administered, which was about 3 times what his order required. And we're planning for harvest or offered for sale more than 750 million board feet of timber to reduce vegetation, giving rise to wildfire conditions, which exceeded the target of the President by 25%. So all told, for fiscal years between fiscal years 17, 18, and 19, we have treated nearly 3.9 million acres, and we will continue to be even more aggressive throughout 2020 in the West. Also, and this is, at least for me, it's exciting. My wife Jenna would say it's not that exciting. But this year, in our budget, we've proposed something very innovative. Most of our firefighters at Interior are seasonal employees. And I asked the President, and he agreed to give us additional resources in our budget to expand the number of permanent employees we have fighting fires. And he also allowed me to expand the hours that our seasonal employees are allowed to work. And these 2 things will create over 700,000 additional hours of additional man hours to address fires and wildlife treatment. And what we're doing is, historically, the services hold hours throughout the year for seasonal firefighters because they want to make sure they have enough hours to fight the fires in the fall. And by moving to full-time career firefighters and more career firefighters, and also expanding the hours of seasonals, if folks aren't fighting the fire, I can be using them to treat other challenges. In addition, next week I'll be rolling out finalization of 11,000 miles of fire breaks, which is an example of how we're trying to be more aggressive on vegetation management, and that is quite significant. Well, as we look ahead, we will continue to be working to be a better neighbor to our communities we serve, to make our department more responsive to you, and to establish our conservation stewardship legacy for the American people. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.